Bowl Buzz, brought to you by our Lucaya Beach and Golf Resort.
Hi, I'm Israel Gutierrez, sports columnist for the Miami Herald, and this is Jeff Darlington, NFL writer for the Miami Herald, and this is Bowl Buzz. Today we're going to be talking to you about the actual Super Bowl game. With the game just a few days away, we'll be talking quarterbacks, running backs, coaches, and making some predictions too.
Let's start with our first question right away, Israel. Let's talk about the quarterbacks first of all. Who means more to their respective teams right now, Peyton Manning or Drew Brees?
You know, I think the way you have to look at this is just honestly look at the running games of each respective teams. Look at the running games in the playoffs. The Colts are putting up 72 yards rushing per game. The Saints, 120 yards rushing per game. The Colts, 0 touchdowns. And actually, all season long, the Colts are the only team to not have a single 100-yard rusher. Actually, one of two teams, the Chargers being the other team, to not have a single 100-yard rusher all season long. That tells me that this offense is all about Peyton Manning. There is no balance there. It's about Peyton Manning. It's about the passing game. He creates the system. He creates the team. I think Peyton Manning is the clear-cut guy who's more...
I won't disagree with you at all. I believe that also Peyton Manning is the guy. But I think you can make a very strong case for Drew Brees at this point in the year. I mean, I think that had Peyton Manning not had the season he had, Drew Brees is sitting here like Phil Mickelson against Tiger Woods at this point. But when you look at the fact that Drew Brees has been able to distribute the ball to 7 different passers who caught 30 or more catches this past season, you realize what he's doing for this offense. He's such a key component. It's not that the Saints are relying all that heavily on their running game. It's just that the Colts are relying on their running game less. So I think that Drew Brees, you can make a case for him, especially in that December 2nd game against the New England Patriots on Monday Night Football. In that game, 50 offensive plays, the Saints averaged 9.6 yards per play. That's ridiculous. Drew Brees is the man, but I agree with you 100% that Peyton Manning is more.
It's a nice argument, Jeff. But this next question just tells you who's more important. How close do you think Peyton Manning is to becoming the greatest quarterback of all time?
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I think he is more and more in the discussion. And this year, going into this season, what you remember about last year and the years before, Marvin Harrison was a key component to the Colts offense for years and years and years. And it's kind of like Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant comes in and finally wins his championship without Shaq.
Right.
You know what? This year, if Peyton Manning can pull it off, he moves further up in that discussion because he will have done it without Marvin Harrison.
Well, I'll tell you how close he is. I think he's very close. I think if he's not already there, I think a lot of people are assuming by the time his career is over, it will be an automatic. To me, I think you look at a guy who can fit into any system and still be successful, and that's kind of how you gauge it. That's why I kind of throw Joe Montana out a little bit because he fits so perfectly in this system. I think it's Peyton Manning and John Elway right now are the two top guys. John Elway, because he did it with his legs and because he had a little bit of an element. But just look at Peyton Manning. He avoids sacks even though he's not mobile. He created this system. He is the Indianapolis Colts. There's not a lot of guys you can say that about. Dan Marino's in there too. I don't really care about the championships because it just depends on how many people are around you. It's kind of a silly argument. That's why I consider Dan Marino still a top 3 or 4. I think when it's said and done, Peyton Manning will be the best quarterback of all time.
Certainly, I think we agree. Even with Tom Brady in the discussion right now, Peyton Manning is proven to be the best active quarterback in the NFL.
Actively right now, there's no question.
Let's move to Reggie Bush, a guy in the Saints roster here. Let's talk about how valuable he is. I mean, we go back to those college days. It's such a key. Second overall pick in the draft. Many thought he should have been the first overall pick in the draft. And now all of a sudden we're having discussions whether he's a legitimate star in the NFL. How valuable is Reggie Bush to their team?
Value is hard to decipher here, but you want to talk about the word bust. And I think that's a word that kind of floats around with Reggie Bush. Is he, isn't he? He was supposed to be the number 1 pick, ended up being the number 2 pick. Look, he is far long enough in his career that you should know whether he's worthy of being that pick. And I have to say he hasn't been. I mean, this entire season, he's missed a couple games, but this entire season has not had a 100-yard rushing game, has not had even a 90-yard rushing game, has not had a 100-yard receiving game. He's had his big moments in special teams, especially in the playoffs, but it's the same case with Ted Ginn. You're not going to draft the guy in the top 10 to be a special team specialist. So if that's what you're banking on with Reggie Bush, it's not really worth that pick. I can't say he's worth it at all. I think he's been a bust, and I think he's not that valuable to this team.
Ronnie Brown was also a second overall pick, by the way. Ronnie Brown has done much more to prove his worth. And you're talking about a guy whose 2 best seasons were marred by injuries. He has done more to show his value than Reggie Bush had. I think that a lot of hype in college kind of cost Reggie Bush, but by all means, he's a nice complimentary player at this point. In New Orleans, though, he is still a beloved figure, and I believe that the reason is because they have finally accepted his role on that team. No longer do they just think about him as a second overall pick. I think they think about him as a complimentary player that they really like in the special teams game as well.
Well, it's a good thing that he's a complimentary player because the running game wouldn't be great with him. Pierre Thomas is what makes that running game, but it brings up this question. There's a couple Pierres in this game. There's Pierre Garcon for the Colts, Pierre Thomas for the Saints. Which one of those two guys will be more important to their team in the Super Bowl?
Well, this is a very tough question, and I'm really split right down the middle because both of these guys, despite the fact they played very different positions, have been great young stars for each of their teams. And when you look at this is what matters most to me. They had nice seasons, both of them. Garcon had a couple 100-yard games during the regular season. Thomas, obviously, a consistent force in that running game. But one of the things that I look at is what they've done when it's in the clutch, when it really matters. And when you look at the championship game last week for the NFC and the AFC, those were two of the stars of the game. Garcon had 150 receiving yards, I think 15 catches, and Thomas also had 2 touchdowns, 1 in the air and 1 on the ground. Those two guys are huge values for both their teams, so I'm really split 50-50. I'll let you decide.
Well, okay, to me it's two different questions. It's who should be more valuable to their team, who needs to be more valuable to the team, and then who will be more valuable to their team. Who should be more valuable to the team, I think it has to be Pierre Thomas of the Saints. Okay. Because like we said, Reggie Bush, not reliable. Last week, 7 carries for 8 yards, and not reliable at all in the running game. I think Pierre Thomas has to be that guy, has to provide that balance that New Orleans has to have in order to, sort of surprise the Colts, let's say. Pierre Garcon, I think, will be the more valuable player because, you want to try to take away Dallas Clark, you want to try to take away Reggie Wayne. Those are your first 2 options. And we saw what last week when the Jets did that, what happened? Austin Collie came up big, Pierre Garcon came up big. I think you're going to see a lot of that because as much the big game as he had, I don't think you're going to see the Saints say, hey, we need to stop Pierre Garcon. He's going to get his opportunities. I think in the end, if you look at the numbers, he's going to be the more valuable player to his team.
Let's talk about the Colts coaching situation. Jim Caldwell, he's a first-year guy, comes into a situation, he's been with the Colts for a while now. He took over for Tony Dungy. It's the same discussion we had when it was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they won their Super Bowl. John Gruden comes in, wins the Super Bowl the year after Dungy leaves. Who's more responsible? Who deserves the credit for the Colts' success this season? Jim Caldwell or Tony Dungy?
It's the same discussion also with Bill Walsh and George Seifert. And look, as much as I'd love to say that Tony Dungy built this thing, it's kind of like, in a college system where one team builds up, like Butch Davis built the program and UM, but the next coach ended up coming there and winning it. I think it's not the same discussion here because this is a different Colts team. This is, like you said, a Colts team without Marvin Harrison. This is a Colts team with a different secondary, with a team that's small, a defense that's small but quick and has to win that way. And this is a Colts team without a running game. Without a running game basically to speak of. So I think that what Caldwell has done by molding this group into a Super Bowl team, he has to get credited for that because look, they were in the Super Bowl last year. And they had different parts or what have you. He took these parts, put them together, made them a Super Bowl team. I think you have to give him more credit than the previous coach.
I'm a huge Tony Dungy fan. I'll start by saying that. I think that I would love if he continued to be an NFL coach. I think that he would bring whatever team he was coaching to an elite level. I really do. But I'm going to bring 2 other names into this discussion. General Manager Bill Polian and quarterback Peyton Manning.
Right.
I think that those 2 guys are as much of a key component to this team as anyone else, Jim Caldwell or Tony Dungy. So when you consider that factor, what's the coach's job? To make sure that the players are prepared for their games and to make sure that they win on Sundays. And Jim Caldwell has done that every single week this year, aside from the controversial decision to rest his starters against the Jets. So I think that, in fact, you do have to give Jim Caldwell all the credit for the success this year.
He did rest his starters, but they got here anyway.
Yes.
So now let's talk about it. Who's going to win the game? Is it even going to be a close game, and why?
I know where you're going with this one already, but I'm going to say that the Colts will win this game. I do believe that, and I believe after 2 years of unbelievable Super Bowls, a few years ago with the Giants over the Patriots, I know that has nothing to do with this game whatsoever, but it taught me year in and year out that when you get to this big game, everybody comes to play. It's been a while since we've had a Super Bowl where they didn't come to play. And I really think that's going to continue to be the case. You've got 2 number 1 seeds. I think this is a great game because it's going to prove in its entirety who is the best team in the NFL. That said, I think it will be the Colts, but I think it will be a single-digit win. I think this will be a close game.
I'm not 100% convinced that the best team in the NFC is even in this game. I think, the Vikings gave up the ball so much, and that has everything to do with being a good team. It's turning the ball over, but I'm sorry, if you don't turn the ball over 5 times, they win that game by a touchdown, maybe more. So I'm of the belief that the Colts are the superior team. I think they're going to show it. I think you give Peyton Manning 2 weeks to prepare for any defense, he will pick that team apart. I think you'll see a steady double-figure difference throughout, and I think at the end it'll be a 10 to 14 point Colts win. I'm Israel Gutierrez.
And I'm Jeff Darlington.
And thanks for watching.
Miami Herald's Bowl Buzz, brought to you by our Lucaya Beach and Golf Resort. Make our Lucaya yours.